Skeletal muscle, it's now considered to be the largest organ in the body. It doesn't just play a key role in locomotion, but also our whole body metabolic health.
Well, let's start with, I guess, a little bit of the confusion around exercise. There are so many options. Would you have any kind of statements for most people? What are kind of the simplest ways to look at exercise from a health and longevity point of view?
I think the simplest starting point, irrespective of age, is to check out the physical activity guidelines for the general population. So these are the chief medical officer's recommendations for how much and what type of physical activity and exercise we should get in a given week. So I guess that the foundation to all of that is to minimize sedentary time, so to ensure physically active living. Now that doesn't necessarily mean tens of thousands of steps every single day. I think it's minimizing these periods where you're sitting for an extended time, making sure you get adequate steps in over a given day. And what adequate means will differ greatly depending on the person's functional abilities. But generally speaking, across the whole population, it's thought that if we're kind of getting towards 7,000 steps a day, then we improve our health and we reduce our risk of certain disease conditions. And there's potentially an additive benefit if you go beyond that. But generally speaking, that's a nice kind of benchmark that most people can achieve. Beyond physically active living, it's important also to try and incorporate some form of structured exercise. So that needs to be ideally both aerobic type exercise and resistance or strengthening type exercise. So the guidance is to try and aim for 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity or aerobic exercise in a given week. So that's 30 minutes a day on 5 days of the week. What that feels like would be, the type of exercise where you would feel as if you'd done a degree of work. So it isn't all out exhaustive exercise, but you'd elevated your heart rate and you've got a light sweat on it. You can half that time commitment to 75 minutes if you do something that is more vigorous. So now we're talking about something that's, perhaps a more intense jog or, a session of biking or whatever it may be. On top of that, it's also recommended that we try to aim for 2 or more resistance or strength training sessions in the given week. So it's slightly different to aerobic type exercise in terms of the way our muscles contract. So we tend to be working for shorter, more intense periods, moving a resistive load, working our muscles against that. I guess we'll get on to talking about why each of those exercise components is important for our overall health. But yeah, what I would say is that the resistance and strength training guidelines, it's generally to try and do 2 or more sessions a week, exercising the major muscle groups of the body. And again, there may be an additive benefit if you can do something with more structure and volume, and you can go beyond the recommendations. But that's a great starting point. But I agree with the point you raise about the kind of this continually incoming new evidence, hey, the latest exercise gimmick or the new thing we should do. And what I would say to that is that, people are always working to find exercise modes and forms that overcome some of the barriers to training. So people, for example, might cite time as an issue. I can't devote 30 minutes a day to doing something, structured aerobic exercise. And so the last 20 years has seen, the real advancements in the developments of things like interval training. So these really short, intense exercise snacks where you work very hard for a short, intense period, but you can potentially do that and shorten your time commitment. So these types of strategies are sort of, communicated to the general public every now and again, but it doesn't mean you need to incorporate that on top of the general physical activity guidelines. It's not additive. You don't need to put all these things together. The new and latest advice is often it's often a recommendation to try and perhaps get an added benefit and reduce the time commitment. That generally is how it works.
So we're going to touch on a few things, but we're going to just start with the strength training, if that's okay. I thought we often like to start with a little bit of science. Would you mind just giving us a little bit of the basic science about muscle physiology and why looking after our muscles is important?
Yeah, sure. So skeletal muscle, it's now considered to be the largest organ in the body. When you stand on the scales, the number you see, about 40% of that number is the weight from your skeletal muscle system. Um, and I guess traditionally we always thought that our muscles are attached to tendons, ligaments, bones, and they play a really important role in helping us move our locomotion. So um, electrical signals sent from the brain to muscles to make them contract, um, to, effectively to tense, and that gives us the propulsion to move ourselves around. We've come to understand in the last couple of decades that skeletal muscle is extremely metabolically active as well. It doesn't just play a key role in locomotion, but also our whole body metabolic health. It's a really important site for the regulation of a whole host of different metabolic processes. And when we move and we exercise, it's also now known that muscle can secrete certain factors as well into our circulation, and those factors can communicate and talk to other tissues and potentially introduce health benefits to different tissues across the body as well. So, given the fact that it's metabolically active, we now consider skeletal muscle to be an organ, and its importance in longevity, healthy life expectancy is now widely recognized, across healthcare practice as well.
So, what are the benefits of healthy, strong muscles, and what are the downsides if we don't look after them?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, what we know is that the high levels of muscle strength, mass, the size of the muscle, and also its function, how well the muscle enables us to conduct activities of everyday living, is associated with a whole host of health benefits. When we think about non-communicable disease conditions, or almost every disease condition you can think of, the risk of disease is associated with poorer levels of muscle mass, strength, and function. So actually taking care of those parameters as we advance through the life course, it plays a really important role in reducing our disease risk. Um, Not only that, but if we do find ourselves in that unfortunate position where we have a chronic health condition, the chances of better outcomes or improved prognosis seems to be associated with higher levels of muscle mass, strength, and function. Now, when I talk about mass, strength, and function, I'm not really referring to levels you might find in an elite performer or a bodybuilder. We don't have to have a huge amount of muscle mass, but relatively speaking, for a given individual, trying to maintain that sort of healthy ratio between muscle and fat mass in the body is really what we're aiming for. So if we feel like we've got adequate levels of muscle mass and we feel strong and physically capable, that our activities of daily living aren't compromised, then you're probably doing well in terms of muscle mass and strength. You don't need to be an elite performer to get some form of health benefit. In terms of underuse, um, as we advance in age, whether we remain really physically active or not, our muscle mass, strength, and function do decline. So this is a disease condition called sarcopenia. It occurs at a really slow and insipid rate. So we lose muscle mass at a rate of about 0.5 to 1% per year after the age of 40. These are the figures that are typically touted. And that sounds really, really small. But if you add that up over a 30-year period, you can appreciate that it's a considerable amount of muscle that we might be losing. So there's an inherent aging process that none of us can fully avoid that means that our muscle mass deteriorates and wastes over time. So our muscle fibers get smaller, and that has a knock-on effect on our strength and function as well. Um, it's possible, as we age, we become less physically active. We're also have a heightened risk of age-related disease conditions and comorbidities as well. So these periods of ill health, and we know that these chronic disease conditions can accelerate the rate at which our muscles waste as we age. Not only that, but if we find ourselves ill or in hospital, so a period of time where we're off our feet, we're immobilized, we know that muscle can deteriorate really, really quickly when we unload it, and an older person is in bed for a confined period. Although at the face of it, age-related sarcopenia looks like quite a slow and insipid process, we think that it's punctuated by these periods of ill health, disease, immobilization as well. And the issue there is that when we lose a lot of muscle mass, strength, and function during those periods of ill health, it's really difficult in older age to get back to where you were before as well without really, a targeted rehabilitation approach.
So I've seen a lot recently people touting the merits of strength as a measure of longevity. And people have mentioned grip strength quite recently. And then I've seen recently on social media thigh strength. And people seem to be very focused on specific
Mm.
areas of strength. Now, would I be right in presuming that these are just markers of general physical strength rather than, we all need to focus on improving our grip strength and our thigh strength? What would
Yeah,
your thoughts be on that?
no, you're right to assume that. Yes. So these are general markers of, I guess, broadly speaking, of physiological function, and they can give us a readout as to how well somebody might be advancing into older age in terms of their physiology and their strength as well, and the knock on effect that has on disease reduction. So yeah, grip strength gives us for the most part across a large population, it can give us a nice readout of longevity, but also healthy longevity as well. I'm really glad you mentioned thigh strength, because we've done some work with colleagues at the University of Leicester where we demonstrated in older adults with obesity that actually thinking beyond grip strength and actually looking at a functional assessment called the chair stand test, which is effectively how efficiently and frequently somebody is able to rise from a seated position in a chair, which is a good indication of the strength in the lower limbs. That seemed to be quite closely predictive, of their risk of sarcopenia. Um, so the nature of the strength test does depend on the I guess the body composition of the individual. But yeah, certainly obesity in older age, grip strength can give you some good readout. But actually, when we look at the muscle mass and body tissue composition in the lower limbs, it seems to be much more predictive of their risk of sarcopenia, which makes sense because we think all of a sudden a person using their thighs to rise from a chair, they have to move, and certainly with a person with obesity has to move a heavier load from that chair in order to be upright. So it makes sense that that functional test is more predictive or closely associated with their risk of sarcopenia.
Okay, so if you don't mind, let's start with strength or resistance training because this is probably the newest, I'd say, for the average layperson. We all think of exercise as running or, playing sports or whatever. And I think we've all become a bit more aware recently. No, there's this added element we need to now really focus on the muscles. If you don't mind, let's just start there. With regards to that, strength training, if someone's thinking of introducing this into their practice, what sort of options are out there and what are the kind of merits of each?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a great question, and there's potentially a really complex, long-winded answer to that, but I'll try and give the simplified version. So if this is a person in middle to older age, who's perhaps participated in some form of structured aerobic exercise, like you mentioned, maybe they were a runner in the past or somebody who was a keen cyclist, but they've never really looked at strength training as an option. I think it probably depends on their starting point, but if this is somebody who perhaps feels that they're a little out of shape and maybe weaker than they want to be, and perhaps a little bit overweight, they don't feel as strong. I think a nice starting point is to perhaps do some basic resistance strength exercises in the home. So that can involve, I guess, a range of movements, really. Trying to move using your own body weight as the resistance is probably a nice starting point for people. So there are, a handful of key exercises I would encourage people to start doing around the home that involve moving their own body weight, using that as the resistance. Um, I can give you examples of what those look like in a moment as well. And I think after a period of, maybe weeks or months when people are going through this routine 2 or more times a week, and they feel pretty comfortable as if they've advanced and they've got a little bit stronger. Perhaps it's then time to look at doing something with a little bit more diversity to the exercise, incorporating a different range of exercises. And it may be appropriate then to step into a gym environment as well. Um, or perhaps, purchase equipment to use in the home to make the exercise a little bit more complex. So things like resistive bands, a Bosu ball or a medicine ball, and those types of things as well. But I think that the simplest exercises to start with in the home, it would involve things like the squat. That can be done from a seated position, so just a hard back chair, a dining room chair. Um, just that practice of rising unaided, preferably without using the armrest if you can, rising repeatedly and then sitting down again. It's a really important movement. The squat in all its forms is essential for longevity and healthy aging. Well, and we know our quadricep muscles, those muscles in the thigh, they seem to be particularly susceptible to deterioration as we age as well. So it's really important that we protect them, because once we lose the ability to rise independently from a chair or to climb the stairs, that really is very closely linked with poor quality of life, a loss of independence, and a reliance on external care provision and support from the family or whatever else it may be, and higher healthcare expenditure on that person as well. So I think the squat's a great place to start. Beyond that, I think things like assisted push-ups or using the wall, to do some basic kind of push-ups to strengthen the chest and the arms, are a really good starting point. Versions of the deadlift. The deadlift sounds like quite an intense, hardcore exercise that somebody in the gym might do, but there are really user and age-friendly versions of the deadlift as well that can be done. Other lower body exercises like the lunge, again, fantastic functional exercises, keep you flexible, help your balance, muscle strength. All of these things are improved. So, yeah, that would be my general recommendation for somebody that's never looked at strength or resistance exercise. Try and start twice weekly, 30 to 45-minute sessions, 5 or 6 key exercises. Make sure you give yourself 2 or 3 days rest at least in between. Um, yeah, and perhaps something I come back to as well. I meet a lot of older people in our research studies who are um, fantastic at completing a really high number of steps in a day. So these are people who are part of walking clubs, or they go out for their own independent walk, and you know, a huge number of steps in the day. And they often tell me that, around their busy sort of social lives as well, that finding the time to fit in an extra 30 or 45 minutes of exercise, resistance or strength exercises, is really difficult. Um, in that scenario where people are extremely high steppers, I would encourage them perhaps on a couple of days of the week to think about maybe shortening the walk and using some of that time to do more muscle strengthening exercises as well. I think that's one way you can fit it in. It certainly shouldn't be neglected.
Any words of encouragement for people who are maybe a little bit later in life, who maybe feel, oh, have I missed the boat? Is
Mm.
there a good age to start? Is there an age that's too late to start? What would you say?
Gosh, yeah. Big question. In terms of starting age, I'm really an advocate for introducing the concept of resistance and strength training exercise in high school, whether pupils perform the exercise is maybe, not so important at that age, but just introducing the concepts and the health benefits of this in physical education classes is probably the starting point in my eyes. And, there's great evidence now that resistance and strength exercise in teenagers, it doesn't stunt growth and cause all these harm. It's actually, it's a fantastic way to develop strength and healthy body composition and posture. So starting as early as possible is certainly something I would encourage. But for the older adult, again, perhaps someone in their 50s or 60s who's never undertaken this type of exercise, there's sometimes a mindset that, that's not for me. And I've missed the window. I couldn't possibly adapt to these, get the health benefits from that type of exercise. Now I need to do something that's gentler. Perhaps I'll join a walking club and I'll step more. That's not the case, though. There are still really, really profound health benefits of strength and resistance exercise, even at a more advanced age. I mean, the earliest resistance training studies in older adults were actually done in groups of people in their 80s and 90s in a nursing home. So again, this was a population at that time. It was considered that if you put these people through resistance exercise training, you're going to do them more harm than good. You're going to cause injuries. You're going to cause joint damage. You're going to cause inflammation. That's going to give them a whole host of conditions as well. But actually, in these very old nursing home residents, the authors who conducted these studies found really profound health benefits. And these were people who needed walking, the vast majority of whom needed walking aids, Zimmer frames, canes, and so on and so forth, many of which didn't need these aids after the exercise. So there's potentially really, really huge, profound benefits. It does differ as we get old. When we're young, it's pretty easy to walk into a gym and see changes after just a few weeks, quite profound changes. We feel more muscular, we feel stronger. Perhaps we feel our body fat's going down, and when we look at ourselves in the mirror, things look better quite quickly when we're young. It's difficult to achieve that same level in older age as well. We're never going to have, because of changes to not just our muscle but all of our tissues. It's very, very difficult to recreate youthful physiology in a youthful mirror image, I guess I would say, in older age. But in a relative sense, the benefits can still be really, really profound. It's possible to build muscle as we age. It is possible to offset or slow the rate at which sarcopenia progresses.
What would you say about reps reps? Is it good to do lots of reps at a low intensity, or better to do higher intensity at
Mhm.
smaller amounts of reps?
How many reps you should lift and the type of load you lift can vary. So if it's a person who's practiced the movements, they know their range of motion, they know what feels comfortable. On day one of actually starting a new program, they may decide I'm going to do my chair squats. I'm going to do 10, just lifting my own body weight up and down with my hands on my shoulders. So I'm not going to use any assistance. I'm going to try and do this on my own. But actually, this could be somebody who's relatively active and they do their 10 chair squats. And at the end of it, when they finish the 10th repetition, if they were to rate how hard on a scale of 1 to 10 that was, 1 being easy, 10 being super hard, they might think, "Ah, that was a 3. I can do 10, no problem, really." Um, it's then that you would start to think about, okay, well, how can you introduce more load? So body weight, your body weight through this range of motion is probably not allowing you to work hard enough that it sends an appropriate signal to your muscles that's going to help them adapt and change in size and strength. You probably need a bit more than that. It's got to feel like you've done some hard work. And this is why we tend to do multiple sets of an exercise as well, because it's the additive, the cumulative effect. So your first set of 10 might feel really easy. Second set of 10, you might think, "Oof, well, that's a 5 out of 10 now. That's harder." The third set might feel like, hey, I'm kind of an 8 or 9 out of 10 now. I'm pretty burned out. I don't feel like I could do many more. That's always the point I would encourage somebody to go to. So I think 2 or 3 sets of each exercise, I would aim for 10 to 15 repetitions. It's kind of time efficient. The idea being that when you get to within 1 or 2 repetitions of the end of a set, you should feel like you're working at around about an 8 or above out of 10 is what I would encourage people to try and get to. Now, somebody might say, "Oh, well, I'm doing my chair squats. I'm on my hardback dining room chair. I'm doing sets of 15." But even at the end of the final set, on the 15th repetition, I still feel like it's quite easy. It's in that scenario you think about, okay, how am I going to make this harder? How can I increase the load? So perhaps now you hold a weight. Perhaps you can grab something from the kitchen, heavy tin. Perhaps you can use some shopping bags and put something in them and increase the resistance. So it's your body weight plus whatever else. Maybe you buy yourself a cheap set of dumbbells to try and increase that resistance as well. So there are ways we can make it body weight plus in order to ensure we've worked hard enough in each set of exercise. Um, I hope that makes sense and gives you some guide of roughly where to aim.
Part of stress-free longevity is, I guess, trying to find, the most efficient amount, and probably in some ways the minimum amount to encourage people to really adopt, healthy practices. And just when you were talking there, I was just curious, is there an advantage to doing, say, 3 sets of a particular muscle group versus, say, 2 or maybe 1 that goes to full muscle fatigue? Is there an advantage to having more repetitions
Mm.
versus less, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and of course, everyone's always looking to to get the maximum benefit in a time efficient way. We always have to appreciate that. In the context we're talking about today, so healthy longevity, I don't think there's any added benefit to going from the 2 to 3 sets, but it really depends. So, if at the end of 2 sets of exercise, somebody feels like they've perhaps not worked that muscle group as hard as they can, then actually incorporating the additional set on is probably a wise move. Our muscles, in terms of how they sense signals from the exercise, the resistance exercise we perform, and how that is translated into a growth, a remodeling stimulus process in the muscle. It seems that we need a degree of muscle activation, um, which is also determined by how much tension we place on the muscle. So effectively, how hard we work it. So we've come to understand over the years that the volume of exercise we perform on a given muscle group, so that this is complex terminology in a sense, but the volume is, you can think of it as the product of the repetitions. So how many you do, how heavy it is, and how many sets. If you put those 3 things together, you talk about overall volume. Um, and the volume has to be sufficient in order to cause this activation, and our muscles can respond to that and adapt, and they may get bigger, stronger. So I guess it really, really depends. But I think if somebody is working in a way that, they're achieving those 10 to 15 repetitions, and the final one or two, it feels like they're putting a high degree of demand and they couldn't do many more. I often ask people that, do you feel like you could do many more? And if the answer is no, I could only do one or two, then that's the point. I'm generally happy if people get to that point. I would also have concerns in older adults as well who are perhaps pushing to go to absolute fatigue. I'm not necessarily sure that's required to get the sort of health benefits we're talking about. Um, and potentially as well, you talk about there's injury risk that may be increased if somebody is pushing absolutely everything and really forcing their, compromising their form. So perhaps they're arching their back or they're moving in a funny way to try and, push this thing out one more time. I'm not sure I'd always encourage that. I don't think there's a huge added health benefit. Um, when the benefits of additional sets and repetitions probably becomes more apparent when we talk about sporting or an athletic context, and maybe more what you might think of as more elite. Then I think by incorporating additional sets, repetitions, more weekly volume, you might squeeze a little bit more out. But for the purpose of healthy longevity, I think these things are really not a huge priority.
Do you think it's worth keeping the endurance exercise and the strength training separately, or is there an advantage to kind of combining them into kind of one exercise program?
The evidence suggests that when we combine the modes, or at least some of the historical evidence suggested that in healthy young people, perhaps again those aiming for something that you might class as optimal performance and not necessarily healthy longevity, there was some evidence to suggest that actually the exercise modes might interfere with one another. So completing aerobic exercise right before your strength session might impair or lessen the amount of muscle mass and strength you build, and vice versa as well in terms of the cardiorespiratory benefits of aerobic exercise. Um, I think a lot of that evidence has been dispelled now, and I think certainly again when we think about the context you and I are discussing, healthy longevity, I think whatever works for people is the best way to go. So, completing your perhaps your endurance exercise, so doing something on the bike or a treadmill or a cross trainer if you're in the gym, and then going straight to your strength session. I don't think that's a bad strategy at all. I don't think this is going to hurt somebody to do that. If it ensures that somebody is hitting those physical activity recommendations, so it's helping them get their weekly aerobic exercise and their weekly strengthening exercise, I would say that it wouldn't really matter if it falls on the same day or even within the same sort of 1 or 2 hour window. I don't think it makes a huge issue. It's more important to get those exercises in than it is to think about how you're structuring them and if they're interfering with one another. I don't think that's the case. I mean, we've not really spoken much about I think team sport exercise and but potentially some modes of exercise that might cover both bases at the moment. So, I think again within advancing age, team sport exercises like tennis and football, great ways to build cardiorespiratory, aerobic fitness, potentially to get some muscle strengthening benefit as well. Okay, so it's not the same as moving your body weight and lifting a weight, but some of those movements are incorporated into these team sports. So again, if you're somebody coming from a background of no resistance or strength exercise, or you've not been an exerciser of any kind in your life, that can be a great way to start. And obviously that tends to incorporate the social element as well because you're with other people, which can be um, a huge facilitator to continued sustainable exercise habits. Things like interval training as well. So again, the last couple decades have introduced this concept of high intensity interval training. So these are short bursts of more intense aerobic type exercise. Can give you, huge health benefits and aerobic health benefits. And there's also the potential to have some improvement for muscle strength and perhaps even muscle mass with those exercises as well. So yeah, I think there are ways you can cover both bases. You can get this, I guess, integrative whole body health benefits through alternative forms of exercise. It doesn't need to be the binary aerobic resistance exercise training. And even if it is, doing those things within the same window, I don't think is going to be harmful.
What factors impact the effectiveness of exercise? And I guess we're still on the strength thing. So things like time of day, things like nutrition and the timing of nutrition, and maybe some of the other pillars of life like sleep and
Mm.
mindset. What sort of things should we also consider if we're thinking of doing exercise to get the most out of it?
Yeah, really, really good question, and I think that I would some of those areas become problematic in age as well. So sleep can become disturbed as we age. Fluctuations in hormone concentrations, reductions in estrogen, testosterone, all these things change. Potentially, the ability to chew and consume protein-rich foods and to digest those foods. All of these factors become problematic, um, and they do all play a small role in helping us get the most out of our exercise as well. So it's an area of concern. Without doubt, the most important thing somebody can do is to complete the exercise, and you will see benefits. Now, yes, alongside that, if you are somebody who can if you can get your 7 hours plus unbroken sleep, great. That will feed into that. That will help in terms of how your muscles adapt. In terms of how much it helps, it's probably quite a small but potentially important added benefit. When we think about time of day, again, I think that the most important thing is that people do the resistance strength exercise, and it really in humans, there's not an awful lot of evidence to suggest the time of day plays a huge role. Now, we all tend to be a different chronotype, which means if we are genetically sort of predisposed to be we could be a morning or an evening person, and perhaps that influences how we exercise and how we adapt and respond to exercise. But again, if you're a morning person, I don't necessarily think that means you need to exercise in the morning because you're going to get a greater benefit than if you did it at 6 7 p.m. There's some evidence in animals to suggest that the time at which we undertake aerobic exercise can influence the sort of metabolic health benefits. It's not really translated to humans yet. And again, we always come back to the point. The most important thing is doing the exercise. You will get benefit. Probably time of day really doesn't make an awful lot of difference, especially when we think, again, we're talking about healthy longevity here, not optimal elite athletic performance. So they're two different things to consider. Um, the final thing I think you mentioned was dietary protein, and again, resistance exercise gives us the huge benefit, and the potentially small added benefit that we can get on top of that can come through consuming adequate dietary protein. So in older age, the amount of protein we consume generally starts to deteriorate for a whole host of reasons. There are impairments in appetite, as I mentioned, our ability to chew, swallow, digest food, all of these things change. Our food preferences perhaps start to become a bit more monotonous. So we perhaps don't get the range of protein-rich foods that we once did. And there's general thinking that the dietary protein requirements should be higher for older adults than the general population in order to support their muscle health. So consuming adequate dietary protein is really important, and um, I think that's across all meals in the day as well. So making sure you're getting having a protein rich breakfast. There's a high amount of protein in lunch and also dinner is really, really important. Breakfast and lunch tend to be problematic areas for older adults in terms of protein consumption. They can sometimes be grain or carbohydrate heavy. Certainly breakfast is anyway. So, the amount of protein consumed across the day can be what I would say is less than optimal to support how our muscle adapts and responds to exercise. The simplest way to think of it is when we consume protein, that protein, the amino acids are broken down. They appear in our circulation, and our muscles use them to remodel and build. And so we always need amino acids to support muscle right throughout the life course. In older age, our muscles don't seem as efficient at using those amino acids, so they struggle to kind of respond and use those amino acids for really important metabolic processes. Um, when we exercise, an exercised muscle makes better use of the amino acids from your protein nutrition. So that exercise muscle, all of a sudden, it's able to better handle and deal with the amino acids that are provided through your protein-rich meals. So the synergistic, this kind of relationship between protein and exercise for muscle health benefit seems to be really synergistic and additive.
There's definitely been a bit of a change in the supermarket. There seems to be an obsession with high protein foods. I now see aisles that are all high protein, high protein, high protein. Is that gone a little bit too far per se? Like, can the average person get enough protein from a good, healthy diet? And secondary to that, would there be any little basic tips, like what types of food or would be some sensible choices for the average person to get a little bit more protein in their diet?
Yeah, you're correct to state that we're in an age now where we see sections of supermarkets devoted to high protein, and the high protein label is badged on. If you look right across the population, you took, yeah, hundreds of thousands of people, you'd actually find that the protein intake levels are generally above the recommendations. Now, the recommendations are interesting because they are based on the amount of protein we should consume to avoid deficiency. Protein deficiency obviously leads to all kinds of potential health harms. So those recommendations are based on this idea of avoiding deficiency. Now, avoiding deficiency is not the same as optimizing or trying to get better health benefits. So they're two different things. So yeah, looking across the population, most people consume enough protein to avoid deficiency, which is why we don't see really high rates of illnesses that are associated with protein malnutrition in the UK. The same in North America and most other places as well. But again, the guidelines are based on avoiding deficiency, and they also don't take into account how much protein is required to support muscle health. And we know that older muscles seem to require more protein in a given meal to mount the same type of metabolic response as a young muscle. So what it means is that there's a benefit to consuming more protein with meals and snacks throughout the day for the older adult to support their long-term muscle health goals, and of course, quality of life, independence, and all the benefits that come with that as well. Um, so I think it's not that difficult to achieve. People can get it from whole food sources. We don't need supplements to get to the levels of protein intake I'm talking about here. It can be feasible with foods. Obviously, supplements are convenient, easy, and perhaps if you're somebody with issues with appetite or chewing efficiency, or there are other, taste or sensory problems in older age, a supplement can be a nice, efficient way to deliver the right types of protein nutrition as well. But generally speaking, we're talking about protein sources that are rich in essential amino acids. So these are the amino acids our body can't make itself. We can only get them from the foods we consume. Um, Traditionally, people thought that animal sources of protein were required in the diet because they are typically very rich in essential amino acids and some of the key amino acids that our muscles really, really need. But actually, you can find high levels of essential amino acids in plant-based proteins as well, and especially if you combine different plant foods as part of a whole food mixed meal, you can get everything your muscles need generally. The plant-based diets probably come with a few more additional considerations, because, yeah, as I said, plant-based proteins are generally deficient in or low in one or more of the essential amino acids. And so it's actually important to consider the diversity of plant-based sources and the types of protein we're getting. But it's entirely possible to support, muscle health, optimal muscle health and healthy longevity on proteins provided on a plant-based diet as well.
I think it's very easy to listen to these interviews and you hear certain things and maybe miss other things. Um, and we kind of may have touched on it before, but I'm just thinking if there's anyone listening who maybe has a physical challenge or a movement challenge or a medical condition who might feel a little bit put off by the thought of starting a kind of exercise program. Would you have any messages for that person who's listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would come back to the idea that the earliest resistance strength training studies in older adults were done in nursing home residents in their 90s, all of whom had mobility issues and saw significant improvements. So the adults in some of these early studies did just a very small number of exercises in the lower limbs. Because they were so immobile, they were transported to a leg exercise machine, and they were supervised through the work and then back to the nursing home again. Um, And the benefits were enormous in terms of the improvements in muscle size, strength, and actually the ability to remove their physical mobility aid from their lives. You know, a high proportion of these older adults didn't need the walking stick, the frame. Some of them, were reported being able to dance the first time in many, many years. So I'd always come back to the earlier studies show profound benefits in people with mobility issues. Now, how does that translate to the real world? I think what we've spoken about so far involves people being able to rise and move their own body weight, and that might not always be possible. There are a whole range of resistance exercises you can do from a chair, so that can be a wheelchair or a chair, the armchair. So again, just incorporating it could be using a ball, a dumbbell, a band to introduce some form of resistance. Again, lower body, upper body. There are a whole range of different things that can be done without ever having to leave the chair. Of course, the idea is, as always, that should be progressive, week on week. The number of repetitions you do, perhaps the number of sets, the resistance, the load that you try and introduce, those things should be progressive, always with the goal that you're trying to improve your function, your mobility. So again, if it's somebody who is chair bound, perhaps starting on this basic chair-based resistance exercise program, the goal is in, maybe 2, 3 months down the line is this person wants to be able to rise from the chair again, just to stand at first. It can be a very, very simple goal like that. It's absolutely possible to achieve that. Yeah. Yeah. Strength training is for everybody.
I'm kind of presuming that the greatest issue with exercise is motivation and sustainability, probably even more so. I think we've all joined gyms and maybe given them up after a few months. What would you say? We're all very different. What motivates and sustains one person won't be the same for someone else. I know that, but is there any evidence out there, even in your experience, have you seen anything that is helpful to keep people motivated and sustained in their exercise plans?
Yeah. Yeah. Really good question. And going into the exercise training with a goal in mind. So if you are a new resistance strength exerciser, having a key goal and objective is really key. And then if you and once you achieve the goal, it's about continually moving that and progressing it. So it could be starting. You want to be able to rise from a chair independently. It could be that you want to be able to carry the extra shopping back from the store, half a mile away. Yeah, so it's about achieving that and then moving forward. Always having progressive goals. Another thing we found helps keep people motivated and compliant beyond the initial 2 or 3 months, which is really that critical point where people tend to drop out and lose these habits, is to sort of reiterate the health benefits of resistance. Well, all exercise really, but when we're talking about resistance strength exercise, I guess right now. So I always come back to the point that there are no non-responders to structured exercise training, even in older age. And what I mean by that is you will be getting some health benefit, whether you can see it or not. It's there. An issue can be people starting a training program. Perhaps they're lifting weights and maybe they've changed their dietary habits as well, but they're not noticing changes in the mirror, or maybe they can't fit into the pair of trousers they want to. Perhaps body fat isn't declining at a rate they'd like to see. Perhaps they don't feel an awful lot stronger as quickly as they'd like to see. Some of those benefits may come further down the line, but there are many, many hidden benefits to structured exercise training that you can't see on the scales or when you look in the mirror. So in terms of the associations with disease risk reduction is profound. If you are somebody who is able to achieve the physical activity guidelines, incorporate some structured aerobic and resistance strength exercise, your risk of these non-communicable disease conditions should be lowered. Um, and not only that, but as I mentioned before, if you are unfortunate to find yourself with, a chronic health condition, your outcomes are greatly improved if you are somebody who is able to achieve these structured aerobic and resistance exercise. So there are many, many hidden health benefits. These tissues, your exercised muscle tissue and other organs in the body are communicating and talking to one another, and there's a health benefit there. Your liver, your heart, all of these, your brain, these things are better protected if you are doing these exercises. And it's difficult. You can't visualize and see these tissues, so you can't see those benefits. But but they are there. So I always encourage and remind people of that, even if some of those very apparent visual things aren't changing and improving at a rate you'd expect, or that maybe your friend is experiencing, don't give up, because the health benefits are certainly there somewhere. And of course, our perspective changes over time as well. I think a lot of people exercise in their 20s. It can be for an aesthetic or a performance purpose, whereas in older age, it's less about aesthetics. It's a little bit more about being able to play with the grandkids as they age, being able to remain independent, and avoid some of the health harms of older age, and disease risks. Things like Alzheimer's and dementia, huge, are always top of people's list of things they want to avoid in older age. Immobility, institutionalization, care. People are desperate to avoid these things and have a life that's kind of full of vitality, socially active as well. These things are really important. So, if you are somebody who is doing structured exercise, all of those things are possible. So keep going.
So obviously, the purpose of today was really a bit of an emphasis on the strength side of things. But would you mind if we just even touch on aerobic a little bit? I don't know if you have any key messages that you would like
Mm.
to share. Is there a best method or a best amount or anything you'd like to share around aerobic?
Hugely important. Again, I think in terms of our healthy longevity, disease risk reduction, incorporating the physical activity guidelines around aerobic exercise in a given week, really important. The evidence shows us that not just from a muscle health perspective, but our mortality from all causes and disease conditions is lowered if we are able to incorporate both modes of exercise. There's a kind of combined additive effect of resistance strength and aerobic exercise as well. So we get the greatest disease risk reduction if we are able to complete both modes of exercise, and incorporate them into our weekly regime. In terms of the mode, I don't know that there's any one. We were talking about 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity physical activity exercise. You can half that time commitment to 75 if you make it more vigorous, so a more elevated heart rate. I mean, what works for people is really, really variable. It could be a really intense, vigorous walkout. So actually, maybe not a gentle stroll, but actually a brisk walk that elevates the heart rate. Perhaps you incorporate more hills. If it's around the home, it could be stair climbing. Sets of stair climbing, a really effective way to achieve that. Some people will be comfortable being able to run. Despite potential joint issues, some people will still be okay doing a light jog to elevate their heart rate in that way. Others might prefer things like a rower or a bike in order to achieve those things. Again, cycling, great exercise in older age. I mean, I'm fortunate that where I'm based, I'm surrounded by cycling clubs that have many, many older members. So I'm used to seeing groups of retired cyclists, men and women, out as a club group. Wonderful social activity as well as getting the aerobic exercise benefits. So it's really variable, and it depends on the individual. If you are somebody who is perhaps you've been physically active, you're a walker. But you've not done anything that vigorous, you've elevated your heart rate to higher levels, I'd probably always make sure to check in with your GP before you're about to start something new, a new aerobic exercise into your regime. Perhaps you buy a rower, you buy a cross trainer and stored in the garage or whatever, and you're about to go on these things. I think I would get a quick screening from your GP or healthcare provider just to make sure there are no contraindications to you doing that exercise and potential health harms there. Good to get the all clear before you start something new, but it's really difficult to predict how your body will respond to this novel thing that you're about to do. So that would be my advice. But yeah, aerobic exercise, absolutely, absolutely essential. I'm mostly resistance strength training these days, but I do my two weekly runs as well. One of which is longer, slower, steady state. And another one is more interval based. So these sort of bursts of more intense activity interspersed by rest periods.
Would it be fair to assume, kind of in a similar vein to the strength training, that I don't know if there's this feeling amongst a lot of people that if they feel that they need to start exercising, oh, I need to start running. And I think what I took from what you said is that you don't necessarily have to. And a lot of the healthy older people that I've met in my career in the hospital only ever walked. So is there a kind of a minimum amount that's helpful? Is it a natural progression like the strength training that it's probably good to start with something low intensity like walking, and then is there a kind of a natural progression if you want to take it further?
Yeah, I think so, and of course that depends on a person's starting point. But again, thinking about those physical activity guidelines, a good starting point is 150 minutes of moderate intensity a week. That's 30 minutes a day on 5 days. So that can be perhaps your normal walk with some more brisk steps put in there. Perhaps you introduce a slight gradient, a slight uphill to the walk as well, just to try and raise heart rate. If you wanted to, again, if I think over time, a nice way to advance that to more vigorous activity, if walking is the mode of exercise, can be to incorporate sort of sporadic bursts of very high, high frequency, fast stepping. So again, if you're doing your local loop, it could be that you see a lamppost, 100 meters ahead, and you decide that between where you are now and that lamppost 100 meters ahead, you are going to walk as fast as you can and really try and get your heart rate up. Um, that's interval training, and we've shown that interval training is a great way to build up really pronounced improvements in cardiorespiratory health in a way that can potentially, be quite time saving as well. So all of a sudden you might go from needing, 30 minutes a day of moderate intensity stepping and walking. Actually, you might be able to achieve that with 15 minutes of something that looks more intense. So these short bursts of more intense activity followed by, a much slower pace. You walk quickly to the next lamppost and then take a breather and do the next lamppost much slower. And then you go into the next more vigorous interval again. So I think that's a great way to progress, is to think about trying to elevate your heart rate or how fatigued you feel at the end of a given bout of exercise, moving solely from moderate intensity physical activity to something that's more vigorous is a great way. And that can be achieved through walking. You don't need to pound the pavements with, hours of running.
Obviously, exercise is very closely related to losing weight. Um, any considerations? I know there's some new medications on the market for helping. Could they have interactions with muscle mass, and any considerations with people who are actively trying to lose weight through exercise and other means?
So I think weight loss through solely through exercise is achievable. Again, if you're somebody with a higher starting body weight, perhaps you're living with obesity, incorporating an exercise program and having higher daily energy expenditure is a way to reduce weight, provided you don't compensate for the exercise by eating more at a later point in the day. Of course, the most effective approach, always exercise with diet as well. Even if you are somebody who is unable to diet and reduce the amount of calories you eat in a day, you will still be getting those health benefits from exercise. Okay, so weight loss might not be that profound, but again, we think about the benefits of these tissues and organs throughout the body. It is still going to be there. So exercise only is still the top priority. When we think about the weight loss drugs, so pharmacotherapies, these the so-called touted miracle weight loss drugs that are now becoming more widely available and prescribed to treat obesity and type 2 diabetes, they do come with some considerations for muscle health as well. So, what these drugs do is effectively they seem to act predominantly by targeting our appetite. They seem to impact how full we feel and how long we feel full for and satiated. And so, as a result, when we're on these weight loss drugs, it reduces the amount of food we consume in the diet. And that's how weight is lost. Irrespective of the mode of weight loss, be it from diet, be it from bariatric surgery or drugs, we tend to lose muscle mass as well. So what we're really after is fat mass loss, but actually when you don't consume as much energy or protein, that's obviously harmful for your muscles as well. On the weight loss drugs, it's thought that as much as 40% of the weight you lose could be from muscle mass. Now, there are two ways of looking at this, is that, perhaps after 6 months on a weight loss drug, you've lost a large amount of muscle mass. But if the amount of fat mass you've lost is even greater, then your ratio of fat to muscle mass in your body tissue composition is potentially more favorable. So it might not necessarily be a bad result. We think this has really important connotations for older adults, though. So these individuals who've potentially already lost some muscle mass over the life course and are perhaps hovering closer to this diagnosis of sarcopenia, or where muscle mass levels might be low, that they're very close to falling below this disability threshold. So their muscle mass levels will be so low that they can't rise from a chair, they can't function independently. In that scenario, the amount of muscle you lose on some of these weight loss drugs could be really, really important. And it's absolutely something that we need to avoid. So, I mean, the research is really in its infancy in terms of how weight loss drugs affect muscle. There's a little bit of evidence out there, but not much. It's something that I'll be exploring in my work a lot more over the coming years. But without doubt, when we think about lifestyle, structured exercise training, preferably resistance strength exercise with an adequate or high protein diet, will give some level of protection for muscle mass on these weight loss drugs, meaning that 6 months down the line, the vast majority of the weight you've lost is fat mass, and you've managed to preserve or protect your muscle mass. That's the best evidence we have at the moment, but really, though, those trials aren't available at the moment. Nobody's done the work, so there's a lot more to be done in this rapidly expanding space.
Professor Leigh Breen, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really, really grateful. We usually finish just offering the speaker just an opportunity. Any little final kind of take home message or points that you would want to emphasize to the listener?
Yeah, I think we've spoken a lot about the benefits of exercise and a structured exercise component for physical health, and how that feeds into healthy longevity. But I think, alongside that, it should be incorporating structured exercise into our lives should also, come alongside feeling, I guess, a connected socially, family, friends, community. I think that plays a really important part in living with vitality and purpose in older age. So if exercise, exercise shouldn't detract from those things. It should enhance and feed into those, if anything. So I think, doing exercises that involve, working with others, being part of a group and a community can be really, really important. And I think, again, focusing on the purpose of the exercise, don't be too concerned if you don't see those results on a number on a scale or your physique in a mirror. Those health benefits are there. Always think about the long-term benefit, the end goal here, which is, again, maintaining that connectedness to family, community, friends, living with vitality and health is really, really essential. And structured exercise is a great way to get there.
Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.